Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Holly Gibson, and I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Track Every Dollar Financial Clarity with OnCost Purchasing. I'm joined today by Carly Orlando from our customer success team.
Hello, everyone.
And we are so excited that you've joined. Now, for anyone who is brand new to Construction Online, or who's maybe never joined us for a session before, Construction Online is our industry leading construction management and estimating software. So, we're going to provide in Construction Online solutions for things like estimating, scheduling, general project management, tracking things like change orders and permits, plus all of your project communication. Now, of course, a big part of that are those financial tools, and we'll be focusing on our purchasing module today. And we're excited to get started. Now, Carly, I know you have so many great things planned for us as we jump in. But maybe you could tell us, just kind of as a starting point, a little bit about just what is on-cost purchasing.
Yeah, so OnCost Purchasing is actually a full featured software tool for tracking all of your construction expenses, bills, payments, receipts, purchase orders, so you can do accurate job costing. In construction, we all know there can be hundreds or even thousands of purchases per project, so being able to easily track and keep up with that is really important. On-cost purchasing in Construction Online, it provides a centralized, organized workflow for managing all of those purchase orders, bills, expenses, etc., so that you can go through and minimize errors and delays while keeping all of your teammates on the same page financially.
Wow. So sounds like a lot of benefits that people can really get from it, and certainly an important part of the process to manage well. So how does this fit in with when we think about Construction Online and the different financial tools that it provides already? So things like estimates or change order selections management. How does on-cost purchasing really fit into the overall financial toolkit?
Yeah, so on-cost purchasing is part of the larger financial toolkit in Construction Online. So Construction Online does offer things like full estimating, change order management, client selections. Purchasing fits in that by pulling information from those estimates or change orders so that you can actually integrate those with QuickBooks to form a closed financial loop, and you can do all of your job costing in one place and relate it back to those estimates and change orders.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, is that really where we start to see the key benefits of purchasing? Like, I think about today, everyone's joined us and investing their time to be with us today. When we think about like what the benefits are of on-cost purchasing, is that really where we start to see some of that come together? Or like, what are you seeing with your clients?
So, as a success coordinator, I work with a lot of clients as they first start with Construction Online and they're kind of getting their companies using the tool, learning how to use the tool, and getting their workflows in Construction Online. And one piece of feedback I hear really frequently is that builders just don't realize that they're in the red on a job until it's too late. Either it's tax time or they're doing their final audits for the job,
Mm.
or at the end and they're doing all their reconciliations, sometimes you just realize that all your margins have vanished and you've actually gone in the red and you've actually lost money on that job. And that happens really frequently when people aren't focusing on purchase order tracking and managing those expenses. Sometimes we think of them as just extra documentation or a pain point that we just have to go in and create all these things, but it shouldn't be a pain point. It should be something that we're really focused on to make sure that we're actually keeping up and staying in the green on jobs, as opposed to a point of like, oh, this is just paperwork that I have to keep up with.
Right. So a real benefit of being able to get that information earlier. Well, it sounds like I think this is going to be a really productive session today. I know you have some key things planned for us as we're jumping into the session today. A lot of ground to cover. What are our big goals or big takeaways that you have planned for us today, Carly?
So, the main goals that I have today for everyone is I really want everyone to get a good grasp on the on cost purchasing workflow. And I want them to learn how to build and manage key financial assets so that when you're running your jobs in real time, you're able to go in and actually see and track those job costs. Additionally, I want everyone to understand how when it does come time for QuickBooks, you have this ability to transfer these purchase orders, bills, expenses, payments into QuickBooks for more seamless accounting as well.
Well, let's jump in. I think that sounds like a great plan. And I know really the first step in this workflow or in this process is just learning how to create purchase orders. Like, where do we start?
Yeah, and so the best way to start the purchasing process in Construction Online is really to go ahead and create those purchase orders directly from their estimate. So your estimate is already going to include all the items you've planned for. So by building your purchase orders from there, you're making sure they're tied directly to your actual costs that you've already budgeted for. So as you can see in my account, I've already got several purchase orders that I have created kind of as sample content for us to look at today. If I look at this first purchase order right here, if I open the details on this, you can see how those would be filled out. So for example, some examples of information you might want to include are things like the scope of work. You can go in and fill that out as much as you want. Things like trade, purchase order type, due dates. You can include internal notes. And we'll talk about this a little later. There are even some ways that you can do approval status or work verifications directly within Construction Online. But for right now, when you go to create a purchase order, you would normally just create it from your estimate. You can do it from approved change order or from scratch, but most of the time from the estimate is what you're looking for.
I see. Yeah, I was going to ask. So, like, do I have to do it from the estimate, or what if I don't have an estimate? So maybe that's when I would do it from scratch. But otherwise, we're really ideally going to have that estimate in the system and just create it from there.
Right. So if you're using a system where maybe you're already doing your estimating someone else, that doesn't mean you can't get value from the on-cost purchasing system in Construction Online as just a place to manage and track those purchase orders. I know I have a few clients who use Sage, and the version of Sage they use makes them do their estimate in Sage to do all of their accounting.
Interesting. Okay.
So they may be doing their estimating there. They may want to create their purchase orders from scratch so that they can still track those within Construction Online, and their project managers can get real-time job costing updates.
Makes sense. But I guess for the majority, what we see the majority of our Construction Online users doing in most cases, they are creating estimates in the system. So that's where they would start here. Now, is that what you're going to show us now?
Yeah, so typically, like you said, they're going to create it from the estimate because that contributes to that closed financial loop that we're talking about of making sure all of the costs and everything are tracked within Construction Online. So when you go in to create the purchase order, you can go in and fill in information like adding a specific title. A lot of the time you may get purchase orders that have numbers that are associated more from the actual subcontractor or the vendor that do not pull from this Construction Online number. So this can be a great place to put in some of that extra purchase order information or additional information that your project managers may need to see when they're building out that purchase order. You can also go in and, like I had done on that HVAC purchase order, you can go in and add scopes of work. You can add your subcontractors. So for example, if I create one, I can scroll to any of my subcontractors and I can select them so that I know who this purchase order is for. I can also set up due dates, scheduled start and scheduled completion dates, or if it's more of a material delivery, I can also put the date that it would need to be delivered by and track those purchase order types, trades, and tags. All of those are also customizable drop downs. So if there was another type of purchase order that my company does that isn't accounted for, I can go in and add those as well. But once you have all of that information in, you can just next step, and it's going to actually pull in your estimate here so you can select what items you're wanting that subcontractor to do. So for example, if I wanted a subcontractor to complete all of my general requirements, I can simply select that box and it will automatically include any of those items right here as part of that purchase order total. But let's say, it's not always perfect when we're doing our estimating. Maybe something's wrong and we need to adjust what that purchase order amount is. I can go in and adjust that to put a purchase order that is higher or lower than what my original estimated cost was.
So, like, for example, if I had negotiated a better price, maybe with a vendor,
Right.
I did the estimate 3 months ago, but now I'm actually going to get it for a little lower. This is a great place for me to do that.
Right. And the
Okay.
benefit of that is you can see those variances later as we're tracking those committed and actual costs. So you can see what those variances and deltas are. Once we hit next step, we can make sure that they're linked to the proper place in the estimate. So this is essentially saying that any of those committed costs that we're putting into the system as part of this purchase order, we're just knowing where to link those purchase orders items back to. And if you're integrated with QuickBooks Online, you can simply hit the QuickBooks Online Send To button, and that'll actually create a matching purchase order in QuickBooks of that value for the associated vendor in your QuickBooks vendor list.
Nice. That was easy. Okay.
And then if you have something like maybe you have a form that you need to fill out, or you submitted like a online form that gives you a print confirmation, you can add files and photos for that purchase order here. When you hit create, it will automatically add to your dynamic table.
So it goes ahead and gets it in the list so that I can really queue that up for management. Now, I have a quick question for you. You have some purchase orders here, and I know there's a lot of like kind of next steps in terms of like things we can do to manage them. But one question that I've gotten a few times is like, can I just print up the purchase order? Is there a way? Like, what does it look like when it's printed?
Yeah, so if you want to print the purchase order, super easy. All you have to do is right click on it in your dynamic table, and there's a print button. So you can even go through and choose what columns you want to display, if you want it to be a different density. And when you hit print on that purchase order, it will actually generate all of those items so that you can send this off. If you have something like a scope you wanted to include, you can also include that information on the purchase order printout.
Can I do like a contract language or verbiage or something like that
Yeah,
as well?
absolutely.
Okay.
So that's part of the default text tools in ConstructionOnline. So if you go to this upper right hand corner, you can upload the default text box here. That way, when you right click and you go to print, you can just choose to include whatever default text box you want, either if it's above, below. You can go ahead and choose which option you want. So you can have multiple default text box for different types of things, subcontractor agreements, purchase orders, all of that.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've made a PO, we've looked at like how we can print one, but I know there's some advanced tools that we can use even for managing kind of the next steps in the process. Like I see that we can do things like it looks like we can do approvals and work verifications. Can you walk through what that means and how we would set it up?
Yeah, so when it comes to ConstructionOnline's purchasing feature, you can easily go in and designate which team members are authorized to approve construction purchase orders, bills, and you can set automatic alerts when it comes to those approvals or work verifications being needed so that team members can act quickly and keep you up to date and up to speed when it comes to the financials. So in the purchasing upper right hand corner, we have our three dot action menu. If we click on this, there is an option for purchase order and bill settings. When you open this up, you can require approval for the purchase order by designated company users. You can also require work to be verified. Now, these users do not necessarily need to be the same. For example, maybe Holly, you're going to be my project manager and you're going to be doing the work verified, but somebody else needs to approve the purchase order. You can have those different hierarchies built out here as part of those purchase order settings.
So you're saying those don't have to be the same people. It could just be different depending on your process.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So if I hit save, then what I will see is in my list, I can see if it's pending approval. So if I click this and I am the person that is going to be needing to put those approvals in, I can determine whether or not it's been declined or approved. And then I would also see the option to go in and verify that work if I am the person who is responsible for verifying work.
So is it fair to say that the approval is usually coming much earlier in the process than a work verified? So with the approval, is that like if I'm your project manager and I'm going to be in charge of making the POs and putting this together, but you maybe as the owner really want to look over that and have a final sign off or something like that, or maybe somebody on the finance team needs to look at it first. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so if I set it back to pending status, you can see that that verified work kind of goes away. If I mark it as approved, then it kind of goes ahead and sends that notification, hey, this is ready to be verified. And you can set that automatic reminder for someone to come back and look at that purchase order as well.
Okay, gotcha. And with the work verified, that's helping ensure that we're not completing or paying out our subs until we verified that the work or whatever was on the PO has been completed successfully. Is that
correct?
Is that the safety catch there?
Yes. Now, with the purchase order feature, another thing that I like to remind people of, you've seen us clicking around in this table quite a bit. So this is actually a dynamic table. So we can go in and we can customize this to be as involved or as little involved as we want. So right here, you can see in mine, I've got mine set up to do the purchase order number, title, and I've got all of my columns laid out here as I want. If for some reason I wanted to control or change the order of my columns, I can right click on the column headers and do show hide. And this will actually allow me to go in and add all of the different tools. So if I wanted to go in and show the company, or I wanted to go in and show the scheduled start and scheduled completion date, or I wanted to reorganize something, I can go in and do that. And it would update that dynamic table so that I can continue to work directly in it. I can also go in and highlight columns. So if it's important for me to know what the total is, or in this case, I have the approval status column highlighted, I can go in and right click to set that column color so that it easily grabs my eye.
I see. That's one of the things I love about that dynamic table setup is that, each user can really customize the view based on what they need to see, how they work. I noticed this has the group by as well. So like if we wanted to even create subtables here where we could see which items had been verified, which ones maybe were still pending or something like that, we could easily kind of section those out.
Right. So if we were to do that group by to show a real world example, let's say I wanted to see which of my purchase orders were still in pending, which one had been declined. I can take this approval status column header and drag it there, and it would actually break those out by that purchase order approval status. So I can see, okay, these are the ones that have been declined. These are the ones that are still pending, and these are the ones that have been approved. So that this acts in real time to show me and keep me up to date. So if I mark this as approved, then it will update and go down into my approved list, showing me that I no longer have any in a pending approval.
Which is really nice because you can then just look at like, hey, what actually needs my attention? Probably the ones that are pending right now, not the ones I've already approved. So it seems like a really great way to keep things moving and just keep the process going smoothly.
Right. You can also filter these. So if for some reason you wanted to go in and filter by whether or not the work was verified or something like that instead of using the group by feature, you can also do that. So I could go here to verification needed. Currently, I don't have any, but if for some reason the work verification needed was here, I would be able to filter those out and pull them.
So a lot of ways to keep those organized. So we can create our POs, have some great options for managing them. When we go back and think about that sort of general workflow of the on-cost purchasing and the different components, once we've got our purchase order created, it's approved, what's happening next? So where do those other components start to come in, and what really needs to happen as our next step here?
Yeah, so when you open the purchase order details from here, if you click on these details, you actually have a timeline where you can see when the purchase order was approved, when the work was verified. It will also prompt you for your next step. So if we look at this one for Eden LLC that I created, if I hit details, I can see that my next action is actually going to be to create a bill. So it keeps you flowing through that purchase order timeline so that you're easily able to go through and understand what your next step should be.
Well, that's really convenient. It just tells you exactly what you need to do next. Okay, so let's talk about bills a little bit. What, like, in terms of the system here, the terminology that we're using, what are the bills and why would I need to create one instead of just managing everything off the PO?
Great. So when we think about POs, and that's a great question, Holly, because that's one that I get pretty frequently. When we think in the context of purchase order tracking in Construction Online, when you're submitting a purchase order, that's not necessarily the end of the story. We're also going to receive things like invoices and things like that from our subcontractors. We're going to receive bills that they need us to pay. So that bill feature is actually taking, hey, I've committed to spend this amount in the purchase order, but here is the amount that I am going to end up paying you. Like the example of that lower price. Maybe they got an even steeper discount and they discount that off of the bill, or they give me a loyalty discount. Mm-hmm. I can include that on the bill to see what I originally committed versus what I'm actually going to end up paying.
I see. Or, sometimes maybe the opposite could happen where I get an invoice or a bill from a sub or vendor. If I have that PO to go back and compare it to, what if it's too high? Now I can compare and say, hey, why am I getting this bill that's actually 10% higher than what we agreed to on the PO? So they're kind of two parts of the same process, but it seems like it could really help prevent some of those types of errors as well.
Yeah, so if we go in, we can either choose to do the create a new bill from this timeline. We can right click on the purchase order and create a bill. Or if we are in the bills tab, we can also go in and create the bill from that purchase order. So if we're looking at these bills that I've previously created, for example, let's say I went back to that HVAC purchase order. This is one of my bills that I've created for it. I can go see, okay, this was my advanced deposit of 10%. It's got all of my information of when I received that invoice, when that invoice is due to be paid by, and if I have paid it or not, when that date was actually paid. So if I'm creating one from that previous purchase order, when I go to create a new bill, I would simply select from purchase order, and then I can choose which bill. So in this case, I'm still working with that Eden LLC, but I'm able to go in and see like, okay, I had $98,000 as part of that purchase order. I haven't paid anything, or they haven't sent me any bills to date, and I haven't paid anything to date. So if I go next step, I can go in and fill all those details out, invoice date, received date, and then I can go in and control what that pricing was. So let's say they sent me a bill and it was a 50% upfront. I can go in and put 50% of each line, and it would divide that purchase order amount in half for me, so I can see what the total cost was, but what they actually put on that bill or invoice.
I see. So it'll work fine if you get billed for the full amount of the PO, but also if there's some sort of progress billing that's happening or partial billing, you're going to be able to account for that here.
Right. The other really common question that I get about this is progress billing. I do have several clients who may receive different proportions or different amounts based on the bill. So let's say maybe it's not 50%, but if we had a custom amount, I can go in and do, okay, this was 3,300, but maybe this was the full amount here. And I can go in and really get granular with each item on that bill as well.
So really super flexible. Okay. And then I noticed that on the next step, it says link to estimate. And is that already done for me, just like it was on the PO side?
Right. So if we go over to link to estimate, it's going to show you where that bill is being connected to. So just like with the purchase order, it's going to automatically pull in those line items here and link them back to that specific line item on your estimate, so you can see that in real time. And just like with the purchase orders, one step I can choose to send a bill to QuickBooks, or it even gives me the option to send the bills and any related purchase orders, receipts, or payments over as well.
Okay. So if you hadn't sent the PO already, you can just do it all in one step.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha. And then I see there's the attachment. So like here, if I wanted to attach the actual invoice that my vendor or sub sent me, this is where it would go basically.
Right. And when I'm talking to most of my clients, that's a best practice I recommend. So if you are receiving like a PDF version of an invoice, or you're receiving something that documents what work was completed, if the job ever goes to litigation in the future, you can easily pull those bills back up and track those attachments at any time. So you can go back in real time and see, hey, these were the attached invoices that that person sent me, so that if anything happens, I have that evidence there for me.
That makes sense. And then that's accessible to anyone on the team who has access to these tools as well. So it's not just you or me, it's, whoever needs to see it.
Right. And when we hit create, just like before, it's going to go to my bill And just like with the purchase order feature, I have the same ability to go in and customize the layout of my dynamic table here. I can go in and do different things like highlight columns or things like that.
Now, does this also have, I noticed some other similarities, I guess. So when you went to create the bill, it looked like we had some options to do it from scratch or from other things. Like, when would we need to do that instead of making it from the purchase order?
Yeah, so let's say for some reason that a purchase order was never submitted or you have some sort of other invoice come in, you can always do that as a first scratch. Or let's say you have an ongoing expense that is just a monthly construction payment, maybe an equipment rental or something like that where there wasn't a purchase order for it. You can go in and create that bill from that expense or receipt so you can go in and track those in real time as well.
Okay. Now, what about the what about the settings? Like I'm noticing here on this table, it's a little different, but like these say ready for payment. So I see these are marked as like, so I'm assuming that means can I pay this bill or not? How does that get reviewed? Is that just an internal thing or are there some additional settings for that?
Yeah, so just like with purchase orders, when we had those work verification settings, if we go to that same three dot menu and go back to that purchase order and bill settings, we can go in and require, oops, excuse me. If we go right here, we can allow any company user to approve payments for bills less than a certain amount, or for all bills, we can choose to require approval by a designated company user. In that case, I have it set to me because I'm this company's admin for our training account, but I could set it to be other people if it was a project manager or somebody like that. That way, they would be prompted when the bill is created to go in and mark it as ready for payment so that you can easily right click on the bill and record that payment to it.
Okay. So just another safety catch to make sure that we're not making payments for work that hasn't been done or materials that we haven't received, or if we haven't verified things, internally as much as we need to, then we can make sure that we're not accidentally, really making those payments. Now, I notice like when we're looking at the bills, so one of the things was, create it from an expense or a receipt. Can you talk a little bit about what so we've looked at POs, we've looked at bills. So if we're looking at these tabs across the top, we've looked at the first two. Tell us a little bit about expenses and receipts and like how do they fit into this workflow?
Yeah, so if we're looking at real time and real life kind of use cases for when you might use like a bill versus an expense or versus a receipt, they're all things that you are going to have that accommodate for outgoing cash. But realistically, bills are things like planned expenses. Usually those come from purchase orders, like invoices that you receive from a subcontractor. Now, an expense is any sort of business expenditure. This can be repeating things like equipment rentals, like we talked about. If you have maintenance, if you have labor, I have some people who use this to track labor and things like that. Any sort of business expenditure that is not specifically just an invoice that has come from a subcontractor, that can be a really good use of an expense.
Could you also use it for, so I guess with labor, if it was like internal labor or even other services like a design service or something, if you provided that in-house, like is it, I guess you're not sending yourself a bill, so would that go in the receipt, in the expenses area rather?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Um, Now, receipts are usually like one off purchases. So if I run to Home Depot and I get a receipt for Gorilla Glue or something like that, I can go in and take a photo of that receipt and actually upload it so I can see, hey, this was my Home Depot receipt. If I go here, you can see I have my little image uploaded, and then I can go in and put those details from that receipt so that I can actually track those one off expenses as well.
That makes sense. And, seeing that photo reminds me, one thing with this tool is the receipts feature is also, I know, available in the Construction Online mobile app. So, because it sounds like for that type of thing, that's something that sometimes I guess that people could come in and like hand a receipt to somebody, an admin or someone in the office and say, hey, here's my receipt for the day. Can you add it? In which case you're coming in here. But if we want people in the field to go ahead, while they're out and about to be able to go ahead and just add the receipt on the spot to not forget it. I know that's available in the mobile app and I think pretty easy to use.
Yeah, it's just as simple as taking out your mobile app and snapping a photo of the receipt. We even do have a feature where it will do automatic text scanning. So you can go in and it will read that receipt and copy it over. Now, of course, it will sometimes you'll want to double check just to make sure it read it properly.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember we had a lot of fun testing that internally when it
Yeah.
first came out. So, all those are benefits of having the Construction Online mobile app. People think of the Construction Online mobile app as really heavily used for daily logging or just for photo uploads, which is absolutely true, but you can get a lot of benefit by doing things like snapping receipt photos
Mm-hmm.
at the job site to track those costs in real time.
Yeah, because that's just so nice to be able to, see that image and again go back and have those items, really connected. Okay, so we have one more tab here along the top to look at, and one of the things with this one that I know is really important is, as we think about, Carly, you've mentioned several times sort of closing the loop on those
Mhm.
financials, and the next step, payments, feels like for me really the place where that loop gets closed in terms of looking at where we start with our estimate or budget, and then being able to see, you know be able to see that job cost reporting right in the estimate. So when we look at payments, that's really the part that's going to come right back onto someone's estimate and kind of give us some of those reporting capabilities. I guess, can you talk a little bit about this process? What payments are? Can we do payments for everything? What does that look like?
Yeah, so when we're looking at payments, payments is specifically talking about the cash that you have actually let leave your account. So you can create payments from purchase orders, from expenses or receipts, or from bills. And it goes along with that purchase order timeline that we talked about. Because if we go back to the original purchase order that I created, it'll then prompt me once the bill is created to create a new payment for that.
Mm.
So it kind of goes through, and as part of that workflow, that would be my next step. Now, one really important thing that I want to talk about when it comes to creating payments is that when we are thinking of payments, that is where our actuals come in. Just because I have received a bill does not mean that I have actually spent money on whatever that item is. So, this is where those actuals are going to pool, and I'm going to be able to see those in the estimate.
And so when we say that in the estimate, we're talking about the actuals column in the estimate that's getting filled in automatically from what's here.
Right. And if we go to my estimate real quick for this job, I have an actuals column that I can see as well as a committed. So the committed is going to be the total value of purchase orders up to this point. So I can click on this committed 35 to see that I have a purchase order here, but it clearly hasn't been paid because I don't have any actuals yet. So if I scroll down and right here, I have concrete pads and walks. I clearly committed to spend 41.75, but I haven't actually spent that much. So it can help me to go through and see, okay, this is the payment associated with that. When I hit go to payment, it will pull up and I can see what payment items were included as part of that payment.
Okay, so it really just connects everything together, but and that payment is the final step. So if we're looking at getting those actuals, what you're showing us here, like the committed is our purchase orders, our POs, and then the actuals are okay, what payments have been recorded.
Right. And when we're looking at payments, just like with bills and expenses and receipts, they're super easy to create. So if I'm in the bill section, I can simply right click and hit record payment, and it will generate my screen. I can choose which bill I'm selecting it for. And then I can go in and just like with bills, if I only do a partial payment or any sort of progress paying, I'm on a payment plan. I can do different percentages, custom amounts of each line, link that back to my estimate, and quickly send that payment over to QuickBooks.
Wow. And it looks like, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm noticing here, because you know, I know between the two of us, Carly, we've probably worked with thousands of companies or who knows how many. But I feel like one of the things that I see here in this part of the process prior to on cost purchasing, especially handling it more primarily on the QuickBooks side, would be just like a lot of manual like coding, trying to like code or make sure different items were selected. And this kind of is just automatically doing all of that. Like I'm just not seeing a lot of manual entry here. Like this has all been really easy. So if we create this payment now, is that bill that's going to show up as paid and then that also goes into the estimate kind of in the same step?
Yeah, so if I do that and I go the attachments, when I hit create on that payment and it's marked as paid, I will then see that actuals column show up in real time in the QuickBook or in the actuals column. So it'll show up in QuickBooks because it's been generated for there. I sent it over, but it's going to in real time update that estimate. So if I go back, I would be able to see that now my actuals column, whereas before it was all zero, I can see the total value of that bill associated to each individual subcategory. And if I drill down, I'm able to see that on the line item level as well. One other thing I want to show about payments real quick before we get too far ahead is you can also go in and print payment records. So if you wanted to go in and print that payment, so you had it as like a personal receipt, you can absolutely do that. You can even include those default text blocks that we talked about. And when you hit print on it, you would be able to see, okay, this was the payment. I can see what I've paid to date, what's remaining, and I get all of those things as an internal receipt essentially for me to track.
Nice. Now, can you print other things too, like the bills and things like that as well, I guess?
Yeah, there's options for printing all of that by right clicking. You can just do print. You can also shoot out emails if you wanted to send someone a quick email, or maybe if you have an accounting team and you just want to quickly send them, hey, I went ahead and created this payment in Construction Online and send it over to QuickBooks. I can just shoot that little email button and it'll go ahead and generate that for me. And I can include any email attachments, again, default text, all of those things as well.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. So I know there were some best practices, and I'm just monitoring here as well. Carly, we have several folks asking some questions kind of related, especially to QuickBooks. And so I know that you will, and we will try to get to those if we can. So we'll try to address your questions as we go through this part and kind of right after, and then if we need to follow up, separately afterwards, we can do that as well. But and maybe a good place to start, Carly. I know you had just some like general best practices and tips for integrating with QuickBooks that you wanted to talk about. I know that's a common thing for folks who are QuickBooks users to want to integrate this part of Construction Online with their QuickBooks. And you've certainly helped a lot of people do that and seen the same types of questions come up pretty frequently. Like what are your best pieces of advice here? What do you normally like to make sure that people know before they kind of start that integration process?
So when we're thinking of QuickBooks, a couple things that I want to reiterate is that creating your purchase order from that estimate helps a ton when you're going to go ahead and create for QuickBooks, because when we're talking about that purchase order feature, when you are creating it from the estimate and you send that over to QuickBooks, that's going to go ahead and match that product and service for that purchase order in QuickBooks to the same product or to the same subcategory as it would in Construction Online.
And that's these items, right?
Yeah,
Basically,
exactly.
that we're seeing on the PO. So that's automatically coming from the estimate. That's what's going to QuickBooks. And that really should already be in QuickBooks if you've integrated your estimate.
Right. And that keeps everything consistent. One thing that I do see frequently with QuickBooks is that people will occasionally have like a different product or service name or something like that. It's going to go through and not transfer as easily if those names don't match up. So this is where you're getting a lot of those benefits from. Now, when it comes to sending information to QuickBooks, I want to reiterate that you can do that when you're actually creating the purchase order, bill, expense, or receipt. You can go ahead and do that from the dynamic table. So there is a column in the dynamic table where you can see when it was sent to QuickBooks. And you can also go ahead and if it hasn't, you can hit send to QuickBooks and it will go ahead and send that over really quickly for you. So again, like if we do it right here with this purchase order, we can do send purchase order and any bills, and it would go ahead and ask me to do the bill, the payment, all of that, and it would go over super smoothly. The other thing that I want to talk about is importing values, because I know, Holly, it used to be where we would have to import those values from QuickBooks into our estimate. And that's really no longer a need with the purchase order. You don't have to do that import because you're creating them from Construction Online and they match with QuickBooks. You would be able to just super easily track those actuals and committed. There's no longer that need to import those values back from QuickBooks, wouldn't you say?
I would agree with that. I would say I think that's the case. Now, you know, and I'll bring it up so that everyone can kind of see what we mean here. But in your um, construction online estimate, if we just look at this, you have your actuals column, and then if you're connected to QuickBooks, there's a green column that reads QuickBooks actuals. And you're right, Carly, before we introduced the purchasing module last year, getting those estimate versus actual reports, getting that job costing data for most users would be an import from QuickBooks or either a manual entry or import from somewhere else. Now, while you still can, so for anyone out there who's like, yes, but I really still want to just import those in and compare, you can do that for sure. You can pull them in, but there's really not, I think there's not as much of a need to. So I know when I've worked with people on it, I've sort of cautioned against investing too much time and making that part of the process unless there seemed to be a really clear business need to do so.
And one thing that I really want to hit on, because I think that this is the most common question I get when it comes to QuickBooks integration, is reporting. How do I get my profit and loss? How do I compare purchase orders to actuals, things like that? Because you're now doing all of that purchase order management, expense management, bill management in Construction Online, you can go to the financial report section, and we actually have a ton of those that are built in. So right here, you can run that estimate versus actual report to track that profitability and show those variances. You can run committed versus actuals reports. I've ran a couple of them to kind of show an example. So this is the estimate versus actual report. It's going to break down everything in my estimate so I can see what the base cost was, the adjusted, and then I can see in real time what my actual costs were compared to that base cost and adjusted, and then what's remaining. So I can really go through and see, like, for example, right here, I had base cost was 25,025, but then my actual cost ended up being 29,000. So I can see that overage amount right here with committed versus.
I like that it's in red. It makes it really easy to see.
Yeah, and with the committed versus actual, I can see the same thing. So if I'm wanting to run just one blanket report to see what did I commit to spend versus what actually ended up happening, like for example, if material prices increase between the time the purchase order and bill was sent, or if the vendor loves me super much and gives me a discount, I can go in and track that as well.
Does that happen to you often?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
I think we all wish that happened a little more frequently. But you would be able to go in like right here and see
Gotcha.
what those committed versus actuals ended up being, along with that delta and variance. There are a few more financial reports people like seeing in here, such as there is an over budget report, paid to date reports, all of those. So this financial report feature, I really can't understate enough how much information it can provide.
Plus, there's the WIP in True Vision, which, for anyone that needs to produce a work in progress report and wants, there is a lot of extra detail that you can get with that. On this note, we do have a couple of great questions I want to just touch on, especially related to this topic. So we have a couple of questions. One person wanted to know, and kind of looking at this committed column and the actuals column, what about the invoice column? And so the question they asked specifically is that invoice to the client or invoices we've received from trade contractors. And that is such a great question because it's always like a point, sometimes a point of like confusion or discussion because they're all invoices, but then it depends on, are you the one sending the invoice or getting the invoice, or how it's going to show up in the system. And so in this case, the invoice column is going to refer specifically to client invoices that you expect to get paid for. So those are created instead of being part of the purchasing module, those are actually created in the invoicing module. And so those amounts will show up here. So when we're looking at invoices that we've received from subcontractors, like, payables, ones that we need to pay, that those are going to typically be entered as a bill. So that's kind of where we would enter those as a bill. And like Carly had mentioned earlier, those bills won't show anywhere within these columns yet on the estimate until a payment has been recorded. So then once you record that payment for the bill, like once it's been paid, that's when it's going to drop into your actuals column. Someone else wanted to know, how do you receive payment on these? And just some confusion over how you get paid. So like for what we're looking at here, these are more expense items that we're paying out. So these are not really things that we are, getting paid for. That's going to be happening more so on the invoice side. I think pretty soon over the next couple of months, we are going to have another webinar that focuses on the other side of that, looking at invoicing. So right now you can create those client invoices from your estimate. You can create those from scratch. We're actually working on a new Cost Plus module where you'll be able to create client invoices from the expenses and bills that we're looking at here today. So a lot of great things to explore on that side. But for what we're looking at here, really we're recording payments out as opposed to recording payments in, since this is more focusing on that expense side of things. We also had a great question, Carly. I know there's maybe a couple of other reports you wanted to touch on, but a great question about with the sending the purchase orders to QuickBooks. Does a purchase order need to be approved before that can happen, or can you do that at any time?
Yeah, so typically what you would do is you would approve the purchase order first and then send it to QuickBooks. That's usually what I recommend because you always want to make sure that that's actually going to go through that purchase order process and that your team's aware and you're not sending it out without your accountant's permission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it is a little bit more too of like what you need that process to be. You have the option to even go ahead and send the PO over upon creation. So,
Right.
it wouldn't, at that point, you're kind of sending it and you're creating it in both places at the same time, effectively. But that is something that you can kind of tweak a little bit depending on like what you need your process to be. Someone else wants to know, we've got time for another question or two. Someone else wants to know here, can the purchase orders sync over to QuickBooks Desktop via Socket? So that's a great question. Short answer is they cannot. So all of the items that we've looked at today in the purchasing module are going to integrate exclusively with QuickBooks Online at this time. And we don't have currently plans to integrate them in with QuickBooks Desktop. Kind of what we see is Intuit continuing to phase that out, as well as continuing to expand QuickBooks Online capabilities. And so we don't see a ton of demand for it, and don't have any current plans to integrate the purchase orders via Socket on like a QuickBooks Desktop front. So it is something that's going to be really work when we are referencing QuickBooks here in this context. It's always going to be QuickBooks Online here.
So, Holly, is there anything else that you think that we should touch on today, or any resources that we have that we can kind of show people regarding the construction online purchase orders?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think, with this, it is such a valuable component of overall financial management in construction online. So, you can kind of see as Carly has gone through, it's really easy to create, these different items. It's easy to record those payments. So we've tried to make it, just as smooth and easy for you as possible. But that being said, of course, you might want to go back and watch this webinar. So resource number one would be, and we've had a couple of questions about this as well, but we will be sending out the recording of this webinar. So if you want to go back and reference this, you'll have access to the recording that you can go back and see anytime. But we do have some other resources that we want to make you aware of. The first one is just going to be our knowledge base. So I can't say enough how great of a resource this is really for all of our features. There's so many great articles and just great information available to you. This is an especially good resource when you have kind of watched a webinar like this and you have an idea of like what you want to do next, but you just don't remember the steps. You can go in and see, step by step how to create a purchase order from your estimate, or, how to mark a bill as ready for payment. So you've got some great, great articles within the knowledge base. We have also created a series of short tutorial videos for OnCost Purchasing, and that is going to be available on our YouTube channel. So that is just youtube.com/UDA Technologies. You will find a pretty extensive library here of short tutorial videos covering all sorts of different things in Construction Online, but for purchasing specifically, there's a little playlist that you can access that'll walk you through how to create these different items, how to log your expenses and receipts. We also have a flow chart that shows kind of that bigger picture loop, Carly, that you were referencing. It really kind of walks through like what we covered today in the webinar in a nice one-page PDF that you can reference that just kind of shows, okay, start here, go here next, go here next. So it really kind of outlines that workflow or process, and we can send that out after this webinar as well. In fact, if you want to shoot me a chat in the Q&A, if you want to receive that, just drop us a note in there and we'll make sure to send those resources your way. And then, of course, we will be sending the webinar, but those get posted on our resources or webinars page right here on the Construction Online website. So you'll see that very shortly change from an upcoming webinar to an on-demand webinar where the recordings will be available. So that was actually a lot of resources.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm like talking for 5 minutes here, but I want everyone to know like there really is such a great collection of things.
Now, do you want to talk about plans? Like if you don't have purchasing and this really struck something with you where you think it could really benefit you, what type of plans is purchasing included in, Holly? And what options do people have for upgrading or adding that on to their subscription?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a really great. I'll go ahead and just jump into one of our pricing pages here. So Construction Online, of course, for those of you who are currently users, you have different tiers or levels. If you are using a team or above level of any of the, residential, commercial, specialty, team and above is going to already have access to on-cost purchasing. So you have that as part of your plan already. If you are using perhaps a legacy plan, maybe you're on the professional level or even Construction Online basics and you want to start using purchasing, you really have two great options. The first one is to upgrade to team, which is what I always recommend people consider first because there is so much included with
deadline takeoff, you get the
insurance tracking,
permit tracking. It is one of the best upgrades I see that you can get for your money.
I agree. I think it's packed with value for sure. Now, if you're like, okay, Holly, I hear you, but I just don't want to upgrade, we do offer on-cost purchasing as a separate add-on. So that's something that you can just add on to your plan monthly or yearly. We're always happy to kind of take a look at your account, make some recommendations, help make sure that you get access to what you need. So that's if that's how you can get it. If you already have it or are planning to add it onto your account and you're like, okay, I'm looking at these resources, everything looks great, but I would really love to just talk to Carly about it, or I really love to just schedule some time with one of your trainers. Of course, you are able to do that. So feel free to reach out to us anytime and we'll get you set up with like a one-on-one training, kind of discuss your use case. So we are always more than happy to do that as well. So I think that really comes to the end of what we wanted. I do see some more questions coming in. Oh, gotcha. It looks like most of those new questions coming are just related to that video recording or resources. So we'll make sure that those get out to you. So I think that wraps us up for today. I wanted to just say one more time, thank you to everyone for joining today, for investing some time with us and really learning about the on-cost purchasing tools and different things that Construction Online can do for you. We appreciate it, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. And until then, thanks again and have a great afternoon.
Yeah, have a great afternoon, everyone.